Alright, now it's time for chapter 2. Such a disappointment from the Tale of Despereaux. Despereaux Tilling lived, but his existence was a cause for much speculation in the mouse community. "He's the smallest mouse I've ever seen," said his Aunt Florence. "It's ridiculous. No mouse has ever been this small, not even a Tilling." She looked at Despereaux through narrowed eyes as if she expected him to disappear entirely. "No mouse," she said again. "Ever." Despereaux, his tail wrapped around his feet, stared back at her. "Those are some big ears he's got too," observed his Uncle Alfred. "They look more like donkey ears if you ask me." "They are obscenely large ears," said Aunt Florence. Despereaux wiggled his ears. His Aunt Florence gasped. "They say he was born with his eyes open," whispered Alfred. Despereaux stared hard at his uncle. "Impossible," said Aunt Florence. "No mouse, no matter how small or obscenely large-eared, is never born with his eyes open. It simply isn't done." "His pa, Lester, says he's not well," said Uncle Alfred. Despereaux sneezed. He did nothing in defense of himself. How could he? Everything his aunt and uncle said was true. He was ridiculously small. His ears were obscenely large. He had been born with his eyes open. And he was sickly. He coughed and sneezed so often that he carried a handkerchief in one paw at all times. He ran temperatures. He fainted at loud noises. Most alarming of all, he showed no interest in the things a mouse should be showing interest in. He did not think constantly of food. He was not intent on tracking down every crumb. While his larger, older siblings ate, Despereaux stood with his head cocked to one side, holding very still. "Do you hear that sweet, sweet sound?" he said. "I hear the sound of cake crumbs falling out of people's mouths and hitting the floor," said his brother Toulouse. "That's what I hear." "No," said Despereaux. "It's something else. It sounds like, honey." "You might have big ears," said Toulouse, "but they're not attached right to your brain. You don't hear honey, you smell honey. When there's honey to smell, which there isn't." "Son," barked Despereaux's father, "snap to it. Get your hat out of these clouds and hunt for crumbs." "Please," said his mother, "look for the crumbs. Eat them to make your mamma happy. You are such the skinny mouse. You are a disappointment to your mamma." "Sorry," said Despereaux. He lowered his head and sniffed the castle floor. But reader, he was not smelling. He was listening with his big ears to the sweet sound that no other mouse seemed to hear. Chapter 3. Once Upon a Time. Despereaux's siblings tried to educate him in the ways of being a mouse. His brother Furlough took him on a tour of the castle to demonstrate the art of scurrying. "Move side to side," instructed Furlough, scrabbling across the waxed castle floor. "Look over your shoulder all the time. First to the right, then to the left. Don't stop for anything." But Despereaux wasn't listening to Furlough. He was staring at the light pouring in through the stained glass windows of the castle. He stood on his hind legs and held his handkerchief over his heart and stared up, up, up into the brilliant light. "Furlough," he said, "what is this thing? What are all these colors? Are we in heaven?" "Cripes!" shouted Furlough from the far corner. "Don't stand there in the middle of the floor talking about heaven. Move! You're a mouse, not a man. You've got to scurry." "What?" said Despereaux, still staring at the light. But Furlough was gone. He had, like a good mouse, disappeared into a hole in the molding. Despereaux's sister Merlot took him into the castle library, where the light came streaming in through tall, high windows and landed on the floor in the bright yellow patches. "Here," said Merlot, "follow me, small brother, and I will instruct you on the fine points of how to nibble paper." Merlot scurried up a chair and from there hopped onto a table on which there sat a huge open book. "This way, small brother," she said as she crawled onto the pages of the book, and Despereaux followed her from the chair to the table to the page. "Now then," said Merlot, "this glue here is tasty, and the paper edges are crunchy and yummy like so. She nibbled on the edge of the paper and then looked over at Despereaux. "You try," she said. "First a bite of some glue. Then follow it with a crunch of the paper. And then these squiggles. These are very tasty." Despereaux looked down at the book, and something remarkable happened. The marks on the pages, the squiggles as Merlot referred to them, arranged themselves into shapes. The shapes arranged themselves into words, and the words spelled out a delicious and wonderful phrase. "Once upon a time." "Once upon a time," whispered Despereaux. "What?" said Merlot. "Nothing. Eat," said Merlot. "I couldn't possibly," said Despereaux, backing away from the book. "Why?" It would ruin the story," said Despereaux. "The story? What story?" Merlot stared at him. A piece of paper trembled at the end of one of her indignant whiskers. It's just like Pa said when you were born. Something is not right with you." She turned and scurried from the library to tell her parents about this latest disappointment. Despereaux waited until she was gone, and then reached out and with one paw touched the lovely words, "Once upon a time." He shivered. He sneezed. He blew his nose into his handkerchief. "Once upon a time," he said out loud, relishing the sound. And then, tracing each word with his paw, he read the story of a beautiful princess and the brave knight who serves and honors her. Despereaux did not know it, but he would need very soon to be brave himself. Have I mentioned that beneath the castle there was a dungeon? In the dungeon there were rats, large rats, mean rats. Despereaux was destined to meet those rats. Reader, you must know that an interesting fate, sometimes involving rats, sometimes not, always awaits most everyone, mouse or man, who does not conform.